Hello everyone, I am Jacob Schrum, and I'll be presenting research on interactive evolution and exploration within the latent level design space of generative adversarial networks. This is work I did with my undergraduate student, Jake Gutierrez. We are from Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas. We also worked with Vanessa Volz of Model AI, Jialin Yu of the Southern University of Science and Technology in Shenzhen, China, Simon Lucas from Queen Mary University of London, and Sebastian Risi from IT University of Copenhagen and also of Model AI. So the motivation for this work is that generative adversarial networks are emerging as this powerful indirect encoding. They induce a latent space on a training set and allow you to focus on the promising areas of that search space. And it turns out you can generate cool video game levels that are new, but that are based on expert designs. And the new thing here is we're combining this with interactive evolution, which, as many of you know, allows for open-ended exploration. It can avoid the convergence that you get with objective fitness functions and allows for you to sort of change focus as you're going, and sometimes you get serendipitous discovery of new things. So specifically, when you combine these two things, you get interactive latent variable evolution, and we're using a GAN specifically to do that. And it turns out that when you use a GAN for this process, you get less user fatigue. That's usually a problem with interactive evolution, but GAN solutions are generally well formed, so you don't waste a lot of time looking at garbage. And we also add a cool feature that allows you to directly manipulate the latent variables, which provides yet another means of discovery. So the two domains where we apply this are Mario and Zelda. Now, there's been a lot of work in this area recently. In fact, the first big application of a technique like this was by many of the authors of this paper at Gecko in 2018. And so that was using a GAN applied to Mario, but with an objective fitness function. And so since then, people have applied GANs to the video game Doom, also with an objective fitness function. There's been some work in a sort of educational video game that's down here on the lower right, which is like a problem-solving game, and also to the general video game AI version of Zelda. And in those two techniques, both had an issue with finding levels that were actually beatable, because sometimes the GAN will produce output that is not playable. And a very recent work that is actually going to be presented at the Congress on Evolutionary Computation this year, which is by my undergraduate student and me, is using a GAN trained on Zelda, but then generating dungeons using a graph grammar. And so that technique is actually used in this work as well, although the details are in that other paper. So the two domains that we're using are Mario and Zelda. And so here is a summary of how we train a GAN to generate Mario levels. So for those that are not familiar with GANs, the idea is you have a generator which is actually generating the levels based off of an input of random noise. Now you also have this discriminator, but the discriminator is only around during training. The purpose of the discriminator is to separate fake examples from real examples, and the fake examples come from the generator, but the real examples have to come from somewhere. And so we took this data on Mario, which is part of the video game level corpus, and what that corpus does is it provides a text-based representation of the levels that looks something like this. And to make a training set, we take a window of data that's this size, and we slide it across each of the levels, and for each of those sort of window slices, we convert things to a numeric format, and then that numeric format is fed into the discriminator with a one-hot encoding. So we have a training set of real data, we have fake data, we train it in the right way, details in the paper and also in previous work, to get a GAN, which can generate Mario levels when you give it a random number. And so here's an example of me playing one of those levels. And this is a list of all the numeric codes for the various tile types that are present in the game. Now, the GAN can only generate one sort of window slice worth of output, But you can create larger levels by stitching together several such slices in sequence. So you're not just confined to like tiny levels. Now the other domain that we trained in was Zelda, and so we used the data from the original Legend of Zelda video game for the Nintendo, and this is the first dungeon in the game, and this is the video game level corpus representation of that dungeon. And in this domain, we train on individual rooms. So the purpose of the GAN here is to generate not a whole dungeon, but to generate a single room. So we extract a room, it looks like this, we convert it to a numeric coding, and that gets fed into the discriminator during training. The generator uses random noise to create levels which are fed into the discriminator during training. At the end, we're left with a generator that produces individual rooms. And we can play those levels using this sort of custom-made, simplified roguelike dungeon game interface that you see here, where the player avatar is the @ symbol. It's moving around in this sort of ASCII world, and enemies are just red E's. And now the tile encoding here is fairly simplified. You can see we have various types here, but we reduce things to 3 numeric codes because we basically just have to have empty space, walls, and this is water. So water represents an obstacle that is not passable by the player, but is passable by enemies. However, the player can pass 1 tile worth of water once they've acquired this raft item. That's this little blue hashtag symbol that the player picked up early in the level. Notice that the player can also lay bombs in the walls to bomb through certain passages. But the reason that we simplify things, so there's 2 reasons that we simplify a lot of the tile types. One is that there's no functional difference, for example, between a wall and a block, so those are the same. But we also remove doors and stairs because ultimately the GAN in this case is only creating the internal layout of the rooms. The connectivity is handled by the graph grammar, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So the graph grammar is what actually takes the individual rooms and it combines them into a dungeon. Now here is the interactive evolution interface of our system. So we see several rooms. If you're doing this to Zelda, you select the ones you like, you click evolve. The ones the user selected appear at the top here, so we have pure elitism there, in that whatever you select continues. And so those 2 levels, or rather those 2 rooms, are going to be in the next generation right here. And all the rest are offspring of those 2 rooms. And so we're just evolving the real valued Layton vectors. If you want to create a dungeon, you select a few rooms, click Dungeonize. More on that later. You can also do this in Mario. And so here, you select some Mario levels, you click Evolve, you get new levels. Once again, the ones that you selected are always in the top, so you get pure elitism there. And you can keep reselecting them if you don't like the offspring that they produce. So you don't have to move on to new things. You can keep the old things around as long as you like them. And you can also play the levels immediately. Here's an example of me playing through that little level segment that was just made. And this uses the Mario AI framework that was developed a while ago by Tegalius and others. So one of the options that wasn't shown there was this Layton Exploration option. So you can select a level and then click Explore Latent Space, and this lets you just hard code numbers for the latent variable inputs and see what the output is. The number of latent variable inputs to this particular Mario GAN is 5, and that's actually another interesting thing about evolving in these sort of tile-based representations, is that it turns out you can get away with a fairly small number of latent variables, which makes things fairly manageable from a user perspective. Now in the interface, you can select the slider and then use the left and right arrows to gradually go through a range, and you can sort of see how the level sort of transforms fairly smoothly as you slide across different latent values. But you can also directly enter a new number and have it sort of jump to a different value, or just take the slider and then move it by a large degree and see what happens. And you can also click that play button there to play any of the levels that you explore. And the things that you modify here also modify the individual in the population, so that if you go back to evolving afterwards, those changes are maintained. Another option is interpolation between latent vectors. So you can select any two members of the population, and so the left and the right here are the ones that are from the population, and then there's this slider that lets you go from left to right, and what that's basically doing is it's walking a line in high-dimensional latent space between the two sort of solutions that you picked, and it's showing you in the middle what the result of that vector would be. Now, what just happened a moment ago is the user clicked replace left. So this thing in the middle doesn't get saved to the population unless you replace either the left member or the right member of the population with your sort of in-between level. So you can go back and forth between the two extremes, and if something in the middle is appealing to you, you can click replace left or replace right to make that individual replace something in the population. Now for Zelda specifically, we have this dungeonize option. And the way that works is the user selects several rooms, and those rooms are the only rooms that can be used in the dungeon. And they're generated using a graph grammar. The sort of high-level backbone mission that's used in all of these generations is shown here. There's a start room, then you enter an area with enemies. There's a branch off to the side with a soft-locked area. Soft-locked rooms are these blue doors. That just means that once you enter the room, that door will not unlock until you kill all the enemies in the room. And that's also always where we hide this raft item, which is sometimes useful in beating the levels. And if you go back to the main branch, there is a key, and then a locked door that, of course, requires that key, and then the Triforce, which is how you beat the level. That's this little triangle here. And this is just the starting backbone of the graph. The graph grammar rules, which aren't shown here, they're on the other paper, expand upon this and elaborate on it slightly to make a bit more detailed dungeon. And then as far as the rooms in the dungeon, they're just randomly selected from the rooms that the user picked. And so that often means that you'll see the same room appearing multiple times. But if you select enough rooms from the population, you could have them all be unique and different. So it's up to which rooms you select from the interface. And if you don't like what you get, you can just click Remake Dungeon, and it'll randomly repeat the process. And so you can do that over and over and over again until you get a dungeon that you like. And then you can also play the result using that roguelike interface. So to evaluate this system, we did a small human subject study. Just 22 students and AI practitioners from Denmark and China, basically just people we had access to. And we just asked them, design the coolest Mario or Zelda level possible. Each user did 3 different variations of the system for 5 minutes each. And so they used a version where the only options were to evolve the levels or to click a randomize button. So there's a randomize button in the interface as well I didn't talk about. Basically, you can select any individual in the population, click randomize, and it just replaces that individual with a random latent vector individual. So evolution and randomize was one option. The other option was Layton Exploration, Interpolate, and Randomize. And so we can think of this as being evolution or direct exploration. And then the order that the user saw those two options changed depending on the user. So some saw one first, and the others saw the other one first. But after seeing both of those options, the users had access to the full combined system with all features. And the results of that study are here. Because the sample size was fairly small, we don't have any significant findings here, or no statistically significant findings. But we do see that people generally seem to prefer exploration slightly over evolution, which is a little bit surprising. And also, the users feel that the combination of the two elements, the direct exploration and the evolution, is better than either one in isolation, which is not really surprising, but it is reassuring that that is what came out of the study. And I have some quotes here that sort of elaborate on those findings a bit. So individuals who preferred one specific method and didn't really feel the combination was better said things like this. So one said, I ended up focusing on evolution and randomization only because I was not aware how changing the numbers could improve my level, and clicking 2 buttons, evolve, random, somehow gave me interesting levels. So this person preferred evolution over direct exploration, and when exploration was available as an option as well, they felt it didn't add anything. If it isn't broke, don't fix it. This other user preferred direct exploration. They said, I didn't feel that evolution added much, and the explore latent space option was the more interesting method. Combining methods didn't negatively affect the process, but it wasn't better than the previous version. Now, users that like the combination of features kind of revealed that it's a bit harder to use both sets of features together effectively, and usually they were using one set of features for one thing and another set of features for something else. So they were sort of maybe getting started with one and then elaborating with another, and some quotes kind of bear that out. So one person said, I was able to bootstrap the characteristics I wanted the level to have by fine-tuning 2 levels latent vectors. After that, evolution was aware that I wanted, e.g., more green pipes. And another person said, it takes the advantages of the previous 2 systems and it added the functionality of generating better levels. The evolve and interpolate buttons help to discover better levels. So there's a lot of places that we can go with this work. Some of the user comments also indicated dissatisfaction with the fact that when you're messing with the latent variable sliders, they don't really correspond to any specific component of the level or even to specific tile types. So when you're fiddling with those latent variable sliders, you have no idea what's going to change, which can make it a bit frustrating to work with. So it would be nice if we could train the GAN in a way to tie individual latent variables to specific tile types or to regions of the level, something like that. Something else which would be nice if this were sort of a production level system would be just direct tile editing. And that could easily be added. So the idea would be that you use evolution or latent exploration as sort of a brainstorming starting point just to get some ideas, and then once you have something close to what you want, you just tweak it a little bit by editing individual tiles, and then there you are. In fact, you could even take those individual tile edits and incorporate it into the genome in some sort of hybrid encoding. So you have the latent portion that we've been evolving already, and then you have some representation of the individual edits that evolve in tandem. And so you could continue developing new levels based on that combination. Other ways to expand the system would be to make it more of a mixed initiative system where there's sort of an automated component that does more of the work for the user by using objective evolution or maybe novelty search to explore solutions for a while. And then after exploring for a while, you take some section of the population, you give it to the user to look at, and then the user individually selects some evolve levels indicating that, okay, these are the ones that are worth elaborating on further. And then you have another period of direct evolution or objective-based evolution or novelty search that kind of goes through the space a bit quicker than a user would. But ultimately, that may not be necessary in the GAN just because the GAN is so filled with quality solutions. And the final thing I want to emphasize is that this source code, which I'll share a link to in a moment, is really easy to extend to other games. I had an undergraduate student in the course of just a week get like a prototype working with LoadRunner based on data that was also in the video game level corpus. And I have another student working on other games. So I'm hoping that this tool can be expanded upon and used on a lot of other games to both be a useful tool for individuals, researchers, and people in industry maybe even, but especially just to kind of test the limits of what we can do when we're using GANs as an indirect encoding. So I encourage you to use that. Now, let me acknowledge that many of the researchers involved in this paper met at the Dogstool seminar on revolutions in game AI. And we want to thank the Dogstool team for making that possible. And I want to let you see who my collaborators were. So here are all the other authors of this paper. Once again, I'm Jacob Schrum. You can reach me at this email address. And if you want this code, it is right here. I encourage you to go to GitHub, use that. Please email me questions if you have them, or post issues on the repository. Like I said, I think it's fairly easy to extend, and also a pretty useful and fun tool. So thank you for your time.